Hey guys, what's going on? Laying back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Broad Peak. Broad Peak is a Polish biographical drama that tells the story of Maciej Berbeka, a mountaineer who made several winter ascents on some of the highest mountains in the world. This movie focuses on perhaps his most famous expedition, in which he attempts to reach the summit of Broad Peak in the Karakoram mountain range. The movie starts by following his first attempt for this climb in the late 80s, where he believes he succeeded in reaching the top after a long struggle in blizzard conditions, only to learn that this is not the case. After 25 years passes, Maciej decides to resume his journey and finish what he started. This movie seems to be getting quite a few mixed reviews, which is a shame because I thought this movie was quite well done. It has problems with pacing and repetition, but it still manages to tell a compelling story about a man's courage and resolve to accomplish something many would never do. Maciej Berbeka proved to be an interesting protagonist. Even though he's climbing ridiculously high mountains and constantly putting himself in danger, he's never portrayed as some kind of mythological figure, instead just being an ordinary man who happens to be performing extraordinary feats. He gets worn down from the wind and snow, physically exhausted from climbing, and has to summon a lot of energy just so he can get back on his feet after resting. It comes as close to being grounded in reality as it possibly can, and all of these things made me want to root for him that much more and see him reach the top. His character opens the movie with a rather fitting narration, stating that the mountain had made its mark on him. This becomes evident in multiple ways, from the physical toll climbing takes on his body, to the feeling of disappointment he experiences after learning that he didn't reach the summit like he thought he did. I like how the movie humanized him in this way and didn't make him immediately motivated to return to Broad Peak and try again. He has a family to think about and can't just leave them so soon upon coming back, especially after how much of an impact the first climb had on him, and this made his return to climbing more believable once it occurs, although there is an issue with it that I'll talk about later. His perseverance in seeing his journey through to the end in spite of the odds stacked against him is what made him such an endearing character. He has several close calls during his climb where it looks like he's going to meet his end, only for him to draw willpower somewhere within himself to keep going, which made him an inspiring character to stay invested in. The other characters in the movie are kind of flat in comparison to Maciej, though this does make some sense since the movie is clearly meant to be focused on him more than anyone else. Although lacking in memorability, the other characters do have their role to play when it comes to how Maciej's actions affect them. Maciej faces tension from both his family, who are upset over his absence, and fellow climbers who partake in an expedition unrelated to Broad Peak and have to deal with Maciej leaving and unable to help. This tension carries on even after Maciej returns from the peak once he learns the truth of his summiting, which made it even more interesting to watch. But it's easily the climbing scenes that provide the most thrills and suspense for the story. Maciej engages in what's known as an alpine-style climb, essentially one that doesn't use bottled oxygen, fixed ropes, and many other types of supplies that would make it much easier to ascend. These limitations, on top of all the other dangers associated with this climb, make his expedition a harrowing experience. On top of this, Maciej has to deal with hazards like ice surfaces, rocky cliffs, and windy blizzards that obscure his vision and chill him to the bone. All of these factors compound on top of each other and slowly but surely start to weigh down on Maciej, which enhances the raw grittiness behind his survival story. There's lots of other little details as well that increase immersion just from a story perspective. The way frost collects on Maciej's facial hair, the deadpan radio communication, and the different kinds of mountaineering terms used are just a few of these examples that add realism to the story. And with this being a movie set in the mountains, it makes sense for the cinematography to be as good as it ended up being. It takes advantage of the weather every chance it can, with changes from picturesque landscapes to hellish storms that almost make it seem like Maciej is on another planet. Whether it's day or night, the scenery conveys both a sense of calm and fear simultaneously, which I found incredibly unnerving to watch. No matter where Maciej is or what time of day it is, he's always in constant danger, and the way the movie balances this tension back and forth like a tightrope makes it even more riveting. This being said, the constant mountain scenery does get tiring to see after a while. There is some variety with the types of terrain, and the orchestral soundtrack does reinforce the scale of Maciej's climb, but even so, it gets boring to see the same visuals over and over again. It's definitely a good thing that the movie mixes things up in the second act to marinate over Maciej's supposed accomplishments. He's finally able to take a break from all the struggles he went through as he spends time with family and friends, and this allows the audience to take a breather with him. The pacing in general, though, is still kind of weird. It thrusts the audience right into the story at the beginning with Maciej climbing, with little in the way of exposition other than brief flashback scenes that don't contribute much to the movie at large, and ends up more jarring than anything else. And going back to what I said earlier, there's an issue with his transition back into climbing that didn't make a lot of sense. All that happens is an old colleague gives him an opportunity, he declines it, and then after two individual scenes that are less than a minute long each, he changes his mind without warning. I know I'm oversimplifying things a bit, but I just found it strange how Maciej was able to motivate himself back into climbing, not to mention that the entire final act afterward lacks the same degree of urgency and risk compared to the first act. it just seemed to move a lot slower and wasn't quite as intriguing to watch at that point. The movie also ended on a really abrupt note, which, while making sense when one learns the context behind this movie's events, still felt anticlimactic in execution. Between the lack of falling action and how predictable it's made by the use of text indicators, the way the story is wrapped up is pretty disappointing. On the whole though, there is a consistent theme to be taken away from this movie regarding the concept of determination. Maciej possessed determination to see his goal through in a way that few others can compare, sometimes getting into trouble because of it, and seeing how it's represented in this movie was quite captivating. Overall, Broad Peak is a tense cinematic experience and yet another exciting life story to come out of Polish cinema this year. If you enjoy autobiographical dramas with some level of suspense behind them, you should definitely check this one out. It is slow and derivative at times, but its dedication to a realistic setting and characters pay off in spades. While I can't say I'd ever do something like what Maciej has done, his life story remains an inspiration for anyone who chooses to watch it. What did you think about this movie? Were you blown away by the cinematography too, or did you find the pacing a bit too slow? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of Broad Peak. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the Italian drama, The Catholic School. Bye bye!